In just 73 seconds, 5 of Israel's most secret military bases were wiped out. No sirens, no defensive missiles launched. So what penetrated the world's most advanced defense systems? Military experts call it the worst strategic failure since 1973. But behind the staggering death toll lies a 40-minute ritual performed deep in the Iranian desert. Who were the 2 men in white robes? They weren't soldiers. They weren't scientists. They carried no weapons, only water from an ancient well and verses from forgotten scriptures. And then 4,000 Israeli Marines died instantly. In this video, you'll step into a labyrinth of modern warfare, ancient mysticism, and a truth no one dares to admit. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And hit subscribe so you won't miss the shocking end of this story. The Mediterranean waters near Haifa were calm, with just enough breeze to cool the deck. Inside the naval base, the largest in Israel, crewmen cleaned equipment, some dozed in bunks, others wrote letters home. Routine silence. The warships anchored at Pier 3 blinked with idle lights. Overhead, the Iron Dome radar sat inactive, trusting the quiet. At exactly 2:44 a.m., a faint tremor passed through the Galilee early warning system. On screen, 3 radar pulses blinked, then vanished. The software flagged it as ambient signal noise. Analysts, half asleep, logged it and moved on. 90 seconds later, Israel's 5 most secretive military installations, Haifa, Herzliya, Dimona, Negev, Palmachim, lost all contact simultaneously. Haifa was the first to burn. Fishermen offshore said the sea turned white before the flame. Surveillance footage, later leaked, showed a blinding flash, then a rising plume, larger than the command tower. Within minutes, fuel tanks erupted. Ships cracked in half, and the destroyer INS Lahav was lifted off water and thrown onto land. No air raid siren sounded. No interceptor launched. There was no chance to react. Military officials were stunned. How could a missile or anything man-made cut through every layer of Israel's defense in silence? The bigger question haunted them more. What power was embedded inside that silence? This wasn't just an attack. It was an announcement, delivered not with words, but with annihilation. And the world would spend the next week trying to understand not just how it happened, but why it felt so final. At 2:45 a.m., just moments after the first radar glitch was ignored, death arrived from the eastern sky. 5 hypersonic ballistic missiles rose from deep within the Kezem Desert of southern Iran. There were no launch broadcasts, no televised threats, no slogans. The missiles carried no national markings, but inside classified circles, they were already known by name, whispered names drawn from mystic poetry and ancient warfare. Burhan 47, Zulfikar X2, Mirage 89, Salsabilem, and Shahiniya Shura. Collectively, they were called the Ghosts of Saleh. Each missile flew independently, following no conventional arc. They bent around tracking systems, evaded satellites, and breached the limits of radar logic. Before Israel could respond, before a single dome could rise, each one had already found its mark. In Haifa, Shahiniya Shura descended like an unseen god. It sliced through the heart of the Israeli Navy headquarters, piercing deep into its steel and concrete spine. Fuel lines erupted. Flames danced across the docks. The destroyer INS Lahav, a symbol of maritime strength, was ripped from its moorings and thrown inland like a toy.
May it find its way.
4,000 Marines died in 7 minutes. Many never opened their eyes. At the exact same moment, Burhan 47 struck Herzliya. The Mossad's elite cyber intelligence facility crumbled into its underground vaults. 5 floors vanished into dust. Black servers, loaded with decades of signals and secrets, were incinerated. Not a single operative survived. In Dimona, Salsabilem slammed into the Jericho 3 missile silo. The underground bunker flared with secondary blasts. Though containment protocols prevented a nuclear catastrophe, the air turned metallic, and dozens perished from chemical burns and collapsing pressure doors. Farther south, Zulfikar X-2 obliterated the Negev airbase. 3 parked F-35I Adir jets, Israel's pride in stealth air power, were incinerated before they could even be rolled out. The control tower was gone. So were all who staffed it. At Palmachim, Mirage 89 tore through the satellite control station. The explosion vaporized the tracking array and 78 technicians. In a matter of seconds, Israel's OFEQ reconnaissance system went offline. The country was blind in space. 73 seconds. 5 direct hits. No interceptions. No warnings. No command alert even had time to issue a retaliatory protocol.
Can anyone identify what
and
that
then,
is?
silence again. Not the peaceful kind from earlier that night, but the kind that follows a funeral with too many coffins and not enough names. The kind that weighs heavy in war rooms when no one knows what just happened. Or why.
Lockdown.
The sea still burned in Haifa. And yet, across the country, another fire was spreading, one that no missile could cause. Fear. The kind of fear that only arrives when machines fail, and something else, something unseen, takes over. Inside Israel's Central Command bunker, the room buzzed with disbelief. Monitors flickered, radios jammed. Dozens of commanders stood staring at satellite feeds that showed only aftermath. Fire, silence, debris, but no trace of what had come before. How was the only word anyone could speak. The nation's most advanced defense systems, Arrow 3, David's Sling, Iron Dome, had all remained dormant. Not one missile had been tracked, intercepted, or even detected. It was as if Israel had been attacked by ghosts. Technicians scrambled through data logs. Nothing. No heat signature, no radar echo, no satellite lock. The incoming trajectories had left no trace on electromagnetic spectrums. Military engineers first proposed the unthinkable: internal sabotage. But every security protocol had been logged as normal. No infiltration, no breach. Then came the whispers. Some in the Cyber Defense Division, quietly and off-record, suggested the projectiles may have been cloaked. Not physically, but spiritually. That they'd been covered by something beyond signal. A chilling leak from a surviving bunker in the Negev added fuel to the speculation. In a recovered 14-second voice log, a pilot's voice trembled through static. They knew, when we slept, this isn't normal warfare. Outside Israel, the world watched with growing anxiety. CNN's headline the next morning read, "Invisible Arsenal or Spiritual Sabotage." Al Jazeera aired satellite footage showing 2 unidentified figures, dressed in white, entering a restricted desert zone in southern Iran just hours before the attack. They weren't carrying weapons. They carried old books and small glass bottles. They were not soldiers, and they didn't look like scientists. In Washington, London, Berlin, and Riyadh, analysts began asking the same unsettling question. If this wasn't just war, what was it? And if the missiles weren't alone, what else had Israel just been hit by? The questions had barely formed when the true weight of the destruction began to settle in. In Haifa, where flames still licked the skeletal remains of warships, recovery teams found themselves paralyzed. The heat was too intense. Ammunition continued to explode beneath collapsed decks. Thick oil coated the water, burning in long, snake-like patterns. Beneath it, bodies floated face down, their uniforms indistinguishable, their identities erased by fire. Some remains were never pulled from the sea. Families across Israel received messages from military command that felt more like riddles than comfort. Your loved one is unidentifiable. Further updates pending. The pain didn't come in waves. It arrived all at once. On national broadcast, as a coffin was lowered into a grave at Mount Herzl, a mother collapsed, screaming, "He never held a gun! He was just a sonar tech!" In Palmakim, a civilian technician was found crushed beneath a collapsed satellite rig. His ID tag melted into his neck. His last message, unsent, was found in his phone. "Heading home soon. Don't wait up." Medical facilities were overwhelmed. Some doctors fainted mid-shift. One nurse from the Negev base, writing anonymously on an internal forum, described the scene in a single line. "This is not war. This is erasure." Psychologists reported mass PTSD among the few surviving Marines and staff. Funeral homes were packed beyond capacity. Refrigerated trucks had to be repurposed to hold the dead. But what disturbed the nation most wasn't the body count. It was the silence of the dead. No last stands, no radio distress, no heroic resistance, just absence. And in that vacuum, grief took over where strategy had failed. By the third day, the grief had hardened into confusion, and the confusion began curdling into fear. Not the fear of another missile, but of something older, harder to quantify, and impossible to shoot down. Investigators, desperate for clues, turned to pre-launch satellite recordings. What they found didn't clarify anything. It only deepened the mystery. Roughly 6 hours before the strike, two unidentified figures appeared near a remote military platform in southern Iran. They wore flowing white robes, carried no weapons, and moved with slow, deliberate purpose. Surveillance drones captured them, performing what appeared to be a ritual. They were later identified as Sufi mystics, possibly from the Hadramaut region of Yemen, flown in days earlier under classified orders. The footage showed the two men pouring water from an ornate glass bottle believed to be drawn from an ancient well associated with Imam Ali onto each of the 5 missiles. They circled the launch pads, chanting verses while an unseen wind stirred dust around them. The ritual lasted 40 minutes. Then they disappeared on camelback into the desert. Iranian state media made no mention of the footage, but independent journalists on the ground reported a burn mark in the shape of a perfect circle at the site, unaffected by fire or heat. Chemical analysis found traces of olive oil, sandalwood, frankincense, and myrrh in the dust. When the video reached a secure Israeli command channel, the reaction was immediate. Several officers requested indefinite leave. One cited spiritual trauma. Another simply wrote, "We are not trained for this." Behind closed doors, a spiritual scholar in Tehran, speaking anonymously, gave the most haunting explanation yet. Those missiles carried more than explosives.
They carried intention. As images of robed mystics and scorched launch pads began to leak into global defense channels, what had first been seen as a military failure now evolved into something far more destabilizing, a strategic paradigm shift. The United States immediately called for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. Officials in Washington, caught between disbelief and urgency, demanded answers, not just from Israel, but from within their own intelligence community. No satellite had tracked the attack. No warning had been given. Nothing had stopped it. Russia and China urged restraint, warning that overreaction would only escalate the unknown. In back-channel diplomacy, both nations expressed concern, not over the missiles themselves, but over what had guided them.
Who are they?
Meanwhile, Israel entered full military blackout. No official casualty counts, no interviews. The press was silenced. Foreign journalists were blocked from Haifa and Dimona. Still, pressure mounted. Western defense analysts convened in urgent briefings. Think tanks across Europe began publishing papers overnight. The rise of intent-based warfare. Can faith be weaponized? The spiritual turn in asymmetric strategy. Whispers of arrogance echoed. Had Israel's reliance on layered technology made it blind to threats that don't leave digital footprints? In Washington, the Pentagon questioned whether traditional missile defense budgets were now outdated. A classified memo raised a provocative suggestion. Our next enemy may not carry codes, but conviction. Turkey, India, and Germany released public statements acknowledging the event as part of a new dimension in warfare, one where belief shapes battlefields. Through it all, Iran remained silent, and that silence now felt louder than any declaration of war. By the end of the third day, no sirens had sounded since the first blast. No missiles were fired in return. No enemy declared victory. The war, if it could even be called that, had ended without terms, without warning, and without noise. The sea off Haifa, once patrolled and guarded with pride, now held the remains of thousands. There were no flags, no names carved into stone, just burned oil, twisted steel, and the silence of the unburied. In a Tel Aviv strategy room, as generals reviewed the timeline for counteroffensives, a junior officer quietly asked, "Is this the price we pay for trusting only machines?" No one answered. No one could. Because this wasn't just a missile strike. It was a message. One written not in code, but in centuries-old faith. Delivered not by drones, but by men who believed that conviction itself could pierce radar. Israel did not retaliate in the first 48 hours. It held funerals. It counted the dead. It prepared for questions it still couldn't answer. And online, as silence swept across military forums and news feeds, one image went viral. Two men in white robes, walking away from a launch site, vanishing into the desert sunrise. One carried a small bottle, the other a cloth bag. The caption read, "You have satellites, we have the sky." In a world obsessed with speed, precision, and domination, the real threat may no longer be brute force. It may be memory. It may be belief. It may be the stories people are willing to die for, and what happens when those stories take flight. Because not all wars are fought with metal. Some are fought with myth, and those wars never end cleanly. Important notice: this story is entirely a work of fiction, based on speculative scenarios and imaginative reconstruction. All characters, locations, organizations, and events mentioned are fictional and do not represent any actual individuals, governments, religious groups, or real-world incidents. This narrative is not intended to provoke, accuse, or incite hostility toward any nation, community, or belief system. The purpose of this story is educational and reflective, meant to encourage critical thinking about the complex intersections of technology, faith, warfare, and human responsibility. In a world increasingly driven by data, force, and ideology, we believe that dialogue, empathy, and a deep respect for human dignity are essential to building a more peaceful future. Because ultimately, history is not only written by what happens, but by how we choose to understand it, question it, and ensure it never repeats the same way again. If you find this story worth pondering, please share your thoughts in the comments and click subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. See you again, with hope that next time the world will choose a wiser path.